we think is a hugely underutilized resource. The research project that our undergraduates asked us to start doing after the first puzzles course has become called the 9x9 Project, Building Math Identity, one digit at a time, and our work in that connects to that work on mathematical reasoning and math identity development. We really want to get variant Sudoku out into the world for younger audiences, ages 9, 10, and up, as part of a way to retain that connection to math and mathematical reasoning through those middle school and early high school years where we see so many people leave STEM fields. And so really an outreach and research project that's going on. So that's sort of who we are. And there are a lot of people we've pressed into service for today because this is going to be a very interactive session. And so Lumos, Stein, two of our former students right there, Juggler, Rock Rat Zero, Dream Librarian, Blobs, and I know I talked to other people last night. I think I talked to you, Ransk, about, hey, will you be a floater in the room? I can't remember. Possibly Glum Hippo. Don't recall. But anybody who's already really comfortable setting, if you're willing to be sort of a floater for folks who are just really cutting their teeth on setting, then we find that those kinds of interactions are some of the richest. Of it's not just one person or two people saying something, but lots of different voices sort of chiming in when you want help, but not watching over your shoulder when you don't.
So a lot of what we're going to be doing today is focusing on those of you that haven't set before. Before this weekend, can I get a show of hands of who had not set a puzzle? So most of you, awesome. So we're going to teach you pretty granularly how to go through the process of setting that for the first time. I know some of you have had the chance in the other workshops this weekend to work on something, but we're going to really start from the basics. We're going to go slow for a bit and work on 4x4 Sudokus, Snackdokus, and then we will just let you do that.
So the experienced setters here, please have fun, set some Snackdokus. But for those of you who are new to setting, we're going to talk about not just the process of using the tools, but some things like intentionality in setting, thinking about the way that when you place constraints in the grid, the way they push information around to other parts of the grid. So we'll talk about intentionality in setting, as well as getting comfortable with the tools. And then an essential part of setting a puzzle, yeah, you've set a puzzle. Now what? Well, you better test it and make sure, A, it solves, B, it's fun, C, it's humanable. But don't just test your own puzzles, test other people's puzzles and give feedback and learn how to give good feedback and learn how to take good feedback well.
So again, our focus is going to be on those of you who are newer setters, but the focus is also, especially for those who may be more experienced setters, we want you to think specifically about Snackdoku. And so, Scojo, tell us about Snackdoku.
So Snackdoku is a series that the Sudoku Skunkworks runs. They post it on the CTC fan Discord pretty much every day while a season is running. They're on season 9 currently. It's been running for a couple of years, I think. And the focus is on puzzles that are really just quick bites of logic. So one little deduction that'll get you into a 4x4 puzzle. Mostly those puzzles are going to take you like 30 seconds or 2 to 2 minutes if you're an experienced solver. If you're not super experienced, it's okay if a Snackdoku takes you a little bit longer. But it's really focused on those little bits of logic that you can just, knock out in a very short period of time. A few advantages that you might have using a Snackdoku as a setter is that you don't really need to work on a full 9x9 grid. That has 81 whole cells to fill, and a lot of things you can get stuck on. A 4x4 is really a lot smaller. You can not break it as many times, or if you break it, you can go back relatively quickly and unbreak it. Some ideas that you have for a break-in or a piece of logic, they really don't need a full 9x9 grid to show off. You can do it in just a few cells, and sometimes the puzzle is better for that. So it's something to keep in mind, especially experienced setters out there. If you've only set big puzzles, maybe you want to try and set a couple easy little ones today. See how it feels.
You notice they're both much taller than I am, so we're changing the microphone every time. So we do want this to be very hands-on. So although Missing and I typically set in F puzzles for the Power of Ranks solver, today we're going to set in Sudoku Maker because it's a much easier entry point if you are new to setting. If you already have F puzzles installed and you're comfortable with F puzzles, feel free to use that. But please do go ahead and open up SudokuMaker.app. And we're going to walk through some things slowly, even if you've already been playing with Sudoku Maker and you're comfortable with this. We're going to go through this carefully and slowly to make sure that everybody's on board. So this is a great time for those who are sort of floating around to make sure that you're around. If you are a newer setter and you have a question as we're going, please just flag somebody down because we want to make sure that everybody's following along and engaged and on board. We usually encourage our students in our classes to set collaboratively when they first start setting, so set in pairs. Some of you may not feel comfortable doing that. You may not know people or have those trust relationships. We do think it's a richer way to set when you're first getting started, but we're certainly not going to tell you you must. But a couple of words on collaborative setting while people are getting SudokuMaker.app up. Collaborative setting is this really big trust process. Now, Missing and I set together all the time. We have our established patterns of interaction, but we've also set with other people. We've set with Blobs, we've set with Dream Librarian, we've set with Bremster, we've set with Virtual, we've set with Crusader 175. Are there other people we've set with collaboratively? We love collaborative setting. All right, well, if you ever want to set collaboratively with us, reach out. We'll try to find a time to do that. But some of the rules that we set for ourselves as we are doing collaborative setting, one is that we would always rather err on the side of including authors rather than excluding authors. So if we've tossed ideas around with people and then there's a puzzle that got started and then somebody goes and finishes it, we'll always reach out and say, hey, we think you deserve co-authorship. But we're never going to put somebody's name on a puzzle that they haven't approved. So if you're sitting with somebody and you're working with them, talk about, at what point is this puzzle ready to be released into the wild? Every author who's on a puzzle should have that right to say it's not ready yet. Okay, it shouldn't go out until everybody's happy with it. So make sure that you have sort of that conversation before you get too far down the process if you're setting collaboratively. But it's really fun to do. So, does everybody have SudokuMaker.app up now?
Anyone still struggling to get it up?
Yeah. Awesome. So, Snackdokus, again, the Snackdoku goes really well with being a new setter. So, go to New Grid, and you're going to change the size to 4x4. And then create. Yeah,
Sorry.
Good. Go ahead. Yeah.
If anyone doesn't have a device and they do want to still participate in this, we should have some printouts of blank 4x4 grids that you can work with.
Great. Thank you, Scojo. Anybody? Yeah. Absolutely. So when you open, if I can use the keyboard, when you open Sudoku Maker, it'll start with a 9x9 grid. And we want to start a new grid because we need to change the size. So I clicked on plus new up here in the corner, right up here. And then on this drop down, I changed the size to 4x4. And so you should see that image in the middle of your screen. And once you've got that image, you click create. Okay. Does anybody need help getting to this point, or anybody not at this point yet? All right. Cool. The next thing you want to do is select the constraints you're going to use. Now, when you're first setting, what we tell our students is when you first start setting, pick a single constraint. The kitchen sink is not the way to go on your first puzzle. And we recommend, at least for our students, that they stick to either thermometers, arrows, Kropke dots, or cages to start with. And notice I said cages rather than killer cages, and that's because we are trying to get variant Sudoku out into the hands of elementary school students where the use of the word killer is perhaps not the best choice. So we typically refer to them as cages instead. So talk to whoever you're setting with, if you're setting with somebody, and pick which of those constraints you want to use for this first Snackdoku that you set. Yeah.
One constraint.
One constraint, single constraint. Okay. Yeah. And of course, if you're working by yourself, have that conversation with yourself and make that decision. So. Okay. And then raise your hand once you've settled on the constraint that you or you and your partner are going to use. We're going to. Okay, most of this room here. I did too. We're still waiting for some folks on this side of the room to make their decisions about constraint. Awesome. All right, now we'll flip it around. Is there any setter or any pair of setters who has not yet made a constraint decision? Okay, so one of the reasons that we're going with Sudoku Maker for this first setting experience is because you can add the constraints you're going to use to the menu to make it easier to access. So what you'll want to do is go up to Add Element over here on the left side of the panel, where it says Add Element. And when you click on that, you'll get a list of all the constraints that are already coded into Sudoku Maker. And you can either scroll down to find it, or you can search for it. So if we want to go with cages, when we click on that, we will now have killer cages in the menu. So, floaters, if you'll go check and make sure that everybody in the room has selected their constraint and has it in the menu, and then we'll talk about setting with intentionality.
Yeah, about the, I'm just gonna do the killer thing we did yesterday.
Like the 3-cage, 4-cage
Yeah,
thing.
no, I'll do it. All right, so say we're using killer cages. There are a few things to do that we might want to experiment with. So one thing we could do is we could just start by writing a 3-cage into the top right, or the top left here. And we're doing that intentionally, right? We want to force something very specific to happen in this puzzle. And that's going to be that we get a 1-2 pair there, a 3-4 pair there. And then we can ask, where do we go from here? Maybe we want to force something else to happen now that these have implications on other places in the grid, right? So a 3-cage is going to put a 3 and a 4 there and a 1 and a 2 there. Notice how they swap. But we don't really know anything more about these digits. So let's choose another cage and place it here. Using those candidates that we have established, what cage might we put in there? So a 4 cage here. Now it forces all of box 2, because a 4 cage can only be made of 3 and 1. So we can write those in big digits. And now we've got a whole bunch of real digits, a couple 2-candidate cells, and we don't really have anything in the bottom half of the grid yet. So why don't we try and put something there that uses the information we've already established? So we could go place another cage down here, and let's just call it 3 again, right? Because now we can just write in those digits. That's gonna place a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4. That now we basically have 4 solutions left in our puzzle based on these pencil marks. So we've got the right half of the grid totally filled in. You can see in columns 1 and 2, rows 1 and 3, there's a deadly 1-2 pattern. In rows 2 and 4, we've got a deadly 3-4 pattern. Does anyone think of any, or can anyone think of any killer cage we can place that might just totally resolve this puzzle right now? 6 where? Like this? So that'll give us a 2, a 4, a 1, a 3, and you can see our deadly patterns are resolved. And that's a complete Snackdoku. That's all it needs to be. And you can see the point of that was to show you that when I placed each new killer cage, I wanted to work on the information that we had established before, find something to build off of that more restricted information that we had created, and just keep iterating on that until we have a complete puzzle.
So when we're teaching our students to set, we talk a lot about intentionality. We talk about the way the information flows around the grid. So what Scojo just did there beautifully was to put in a cage in box 1 and then push that information into box 2 by putting another cage in that turned out to be forced. And then that pushed down to box 4 and again forced another cage and finally put a cage in box 3, which resolved the entire grid. Now, when you're setting 4x4s, this sort of pushing of information is fairly simple. When you get to bigger puzzles, it can get a little bit more complicated and complex.
What we're going to do now is give you about 15 minutes to set a Snackdoku. You may not finish, that's okay. But we want you to have a complete puzzle or close to a complete puzzle before we talk about the next steps when you're setting. So about 15 minutes, we'll all be wandering around, see what you got.
Introduce ourselves again.
Oh, there's. Okay. All right. Based on the caliber of the chit-chat in the room, as an instructor, I can tell you're all now completed the task, the first task, and we're ready to move on. So the next piece of creating a puzzle is possibly more difficult than actually setting the puzzle in the first place.
I like to quote T.S. Eliot here, which is the naming of puzzles is a delicate matter. It isn't just one of your holiday games. You may think at first I'm as mad as a hatter when I tell you a puzzle must have 3 different names. The first is the testing one. Finding a good name for a puzzle is not easy, but it is a good idea. It really is one of the hardest parts of setting a puzzle is finding a good name for it. But the other thing you need to do, you need to find a good name for, is you. Hi, I'm missing a few cards. How many of you have heard of missing a few cards? Yeah, well, you've all heard of me because I'm out here in front of you. How many of you have heard of full deck and missing a few cards prior to this weekend? Yeah. How many of you have heard of Neil and Eliza? Much fewer, much fewer. We chose the names very early for reasons that we'll tell you in individual settings. It has nothing to do with my confusion, usually. So think about choosing a name for yourself. Make it something personal. I like to say, get a little bit of humor in there. Scojo, you chose yours for...
It's my name, and then you chop off some letters.
Yeah, that's a perfectly good way of doing it.
Repeat it because not everybody can necessarily hear.
Yeah, Scojo's name is Scojo because he took his name, Scott Joss, and chopped some letters off, put them together, and got Scojo. Great way of coming up with the name. Lucien came up with his name somehow, and I assumed when I first met Lucien that was actually his real name as well, but it's not. So come up with a good setter name. Those are two pieces of information that will go in the puzzle. The other thing you need to have in the puzzle is rules. And you've all played Sudoku puzzles. You've all looked at the rule set and ignored the rule that said there's a knight's move constraint. I've never forgotten the knight's move constraint more than 3 times in a single puzzle. No, that's not quite true. So we need to add rules. And we all, of course, remember the absolutely correct phrasing for every rule, right? Yeah, so we've put together a list for our students of some basically, hopefully close to standard phrasings for most of the common constraints. They're on missingdeck.net in a file constraints.html. And you can open that.
And we've just put the link in the general channel in the server, so you can click on it from Discord.
And you can search down that. You can Control F and find the particular rule you're using, and just copy and paste the rule text into where we're showing you in a moment, which, Eliza.
Okay, so we've said these are the things you need to do. You may have already figured out how to do those in Sudoku Maker, but in case you haven't, we're going to talk you through that. So go back to whichever puzzle it is that you have finished and want to go ahead and name and give rules to. And up at the top, you'll notice there's this little pencil icon, and it says Nameless Sudoku. Sven, how many nameless Sudokus do you get published in a typical day? Many, many, many. Most popular puzzle title out there. So when you click on Nameless Sudoku, you get the chance to change that. So under name, that's not your name, that's the name of the puzzle. Give your puzzle a name. And then on the author line, you'll put your Sudokunims. That's what we call them, our Sudokunims. And again, if you are collaborating, make sure that you and your co-authors have agreed on which order and that you've got their name spelled right and all of those good things. And then rules is where you can copy and paste the rules for your Snackdoku. Remember to include the rules for Sudoku if it is standard Sudoku. So if you are doing a standard 4x4 Sudoku plus arrows, don't just put arrows. That's what our students forget all the time. So, and once you've put in those rules, you click on Update. And so I'm just going to put in test, maybe, if I can actually do it. Spin this around. So if I pop in a puzzle name of, how about the SudokuCon demo? And Scojo was the one who walked through this, so we put Scojo's name. Scojo, are you okay with having your name on this puzzle? Okay, but it's good to check, right? We always check. And then we go to the constraints page, and we find, I clicked on it on the slide that I had, but the link is also in the general channel. This is the constraints page that we put together for our students. We do update it as people suggest changes. That's our hope. And then I'll scroll down and I'll pick up standard 4x4 Sudoku, and I missed the S, and I'm aware of that, and I'll pop it in when I get over here. And then I'll just copy, maybe I'll copy it. So I'm starting to feel Glum Hippo's pain with this keyboard and laptop. I'm right there with you, Glum Hippo. And then we also, in this puzzle, had cages. So again, we call those cages rather than killer cages. These are in alphabetical order. And in this particular puzzle, we don't need that they can't repeat. We don't have a version where that's left out. We probably should. But all of these cages are single cell dominoes. So in my rules, I'm actually going to take out the cannot repeat because it's extraneous information. I'm just going to say the digits in cages must sum to the value shown. I'm going to update, and now I've got a puzzle. And now if we want to export it to SudokuPad, there are a couple of different ways to do it. We do encourage you to save an editing link, which you can do under Share. If you go under Share and you get to the link, you want to include the entered digits, pencil marks, and so on. And you can copy this to the clipboard. We have a spreadsheet of works in progress. We have Discord channels of works in progress, all sorts of things. You can also, if you just want to export it straight to SudokuPad, just click on play. And there it is. You got it to test. And testing is important.
Yeah. There it is. So once you're confident that you've set a unique puzzle, you might not actually be done with setting. I like to consider 3 levels of when your puzzle is done. The first level is your puzzle does have a unique solution. That's sort of the bare minimum when you're setting a puzzle. The next level is that you hopefully will have your unique solution be humanly findable. So that doesn't mean the same thing for everyone, but generally, if you have to bifurcate 30 steps down a chain to remove one candidate from a cell, and that step is integral to the solve path, that's not good. That's probably really not humanly findable. So keep working on that until you have one that you can solve. The next step of that, and that's level 3, I think this is when you can start to consider your puzzle done, is when you've found that humanly findable solution, is it fun to get there? And fun is also sort of a dubiously defined term here. But test it against some people, see if they think that your puzzle meets all 3 of these criteria. And then, it's up to you. You can keep working on it if they give you some feedback that maybe it isn't so fun or it isn't humanly findable. But it's a sort of gray area, but you do want to test your puzzles and make sure that they all agree that it's level 3.
And Clover has kindly set up channels in the SudokuCon server that mimic the types of channels you'd find in the CTC server for submitting a puzzle for feedback and giving feedback on that puzzle. So if you want to post your Snackdoku to the Snackdoku testing submissions channel in the SudokuCon server, and then when you give feedback, you can post that feedback under Snackdoku feedback. Make sure you @ the person who posted it so that they get the notification that there's feedback waiting for them and they don't have to sit there scrolling and looking for the feedback. And let's talk about what constitutes good feedback. Philip, you gave me a thumbs up on the feedback I sent on that one fortress puzzle. So I'm glad that I gave good feedback. We'll talk about what might have been included there. What's that? Oh, the feedback was I got through the puzzle. I think I also gave you some more information than that, but here, Missing's going to talk about that a little bit.
That's not it. Okay. So when you're testing a puzzle for yourself, it's hard to give yourself good feedback. And if you've set the puzzle and you've intentionally put in some logic, like there's this 3 cage in the upper left, which is pointing in a 4 cage in the upper right, and you know that's pushing that information around, you've built that into the puzzle, you're going to see it. But some other people might not. They didn't create the puzzle with that in mind. So it's a really good idea to get your friends and people sitting next to you in the room here to test your puzzle, or just anybody who finds it in the Discord channel to test your puzzle. And the sorts of questions you should be asking when you are testing someone's puzzle is what good feedback can I give? Questions like, do the rules need clarification or rewording? Now, hopefully, if you're using rules from a well-crafted rule set, like I hope ours is, then that question shouldn't usually be, yes, they do, even though sometimes our students who are using that still manage to get the, yes, they do need reworking. Feedback on how long the puzzle took. Did it flow nicely? Did you get stuck staring at that, what appeared to be a deadly pattern of 4 different digits for an hour until you finally hit yourself and realize what you were missing? So the flow is really important. Try and be kind. Let's emulate Simon when he says, we do like your comments, especially when they're kind. Try and be kind, but honest, constructive, and specific. And if you really want to earn a gold star, take a video of your solve or capture the replay of your solve and send it to the constructor so they can look through the path you took through the puzzle. That's very useful help for a setter. And when you're taking feedback, take it the right way. If somebody sounds a little overcritical, take it as positive criticism and as a gift to help you make the best puzzle possible. And just because somebody says, well, you might make these changes, you don't have to do that. You don't have to make any change someone suggests, but take the feedback seriously. But ultimately, it's your puzzle, not theirs. And again, we've got the links for testing and for feedback at the bottom of the screen, and those links are in the general channel.
But yeah, whatever. Yeah. So one thing because this is a Snackdoku panel primarily, we do want to sort of talk about what the level of difficulty for a Snackdoku is. And I mentioned earlier that it's usually defined as something that can be solved between 30 seconds and 2 minutes by an experienced solver. But, you know, here's a couple specific things that you can think about. The puzzle on the left is solvable, you know, certainly in under 30 seconds. But you can look at it, you don't even have to touch the computer. You can pretty much write in every digit off the top of your head. It's just a standard thermo, you know, it's gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4 along that, and everything just fills itself in after that. And maybe that's a little too easy. So try something different, something that doesn't immediately force all the digits to be placed. So the one on the right is still super easy. You can do it in a few seconds. But you might have to think about what the candidates are for those cells along the thermos. And then you'll run into, you know, some easy Sudoku restrictions based on those candidates that you've put in. So that's something you should think about. You still want your puzzle to be worth solving. And I don't think the one on the left is worth solving. No one's gonna get much fun out of that. And because the puzzle is really small, it doesn't have to be like 1 and 2 star deductions. Some puzzles, they can get away with sort of a medium level difficulty deduction if that's the only step in the puzzle. And I'll leave it up to you to think about, you know, how hard you think medium level is or what that looks like. But there's sort of a gray area. Definitely test it with people. See what they think the difficulty level is, if it's too easy, too hard, to really fit right in that sweet spot of Snackdoku.
So we're going to give you about 20 more minutes to set, but also to post your puzzles, to give feedback, to get feedback. And we'd really particularly like you to test somebody else's Snackdoku in that testing channel and give the feedback, because giving that feedback is actually really, really fun and also really important to, for your growth as a solver. When we have about 15 minutes left, we're going to come back and we're going to share with you some tips of things that we've learned over our journey as setters, and also give you some links for what to do with your Snackdokus once you're totally happy with them. All right? So about 20 minutes, we'll all be floating around. If you got questions or want to run something by us, flag us down. And I'm actually going to interrupt again because we realized that we neglected to show you one thing on the export. Because how many of you have ever, you pop open a puzzle and it doesn't have an embedded solution, and you're like, oh, right. We like the embedded solutions. So when you're exporting, whoops, I need to go back, sorry. When we go to share in here and go to SudokuPad over here, you want to actually, the first time you're exporting to SudokuPad, you want to click the use currently filled in values as the solution. And then my experience with SudokuPad, and Sir Zemek, maybe you can confirm this, is that once you've done that once, it saves that as the default. Is that? Okay, great, yeah. So once you've set it as using the currently filled in values as the solution, then when you export it, after that, actually, it should be good. And you'll have the solution. So make sure your solution is embedded. That's the big thing. And we're going to be super quick with these. All right, we are so excited to see all the Snackdokus in the testing submission. We plan to solve them on our trip home or once we're back. We know that we've gotten a lot of feedback already. We do want to make sure that we end, if not early, then right on time, because we're all need to hit the road and go to airports and things like that. So we do want to give a little bit of advice that we've learned over the years growing as setters. And the first thing that we'll say is what we tell our students, and this is, we got much better as teachers of setting once we started telling our students this, which is set a bunch of 4x4s first with a single constraint. Get used to that constraint. Learn what that constraint does. Figure out the logic for that one. Set a bunch of 4x4s with a different constraint. Now, notice we didn't do this. If you look back at our website in the archive, our early puzzles are the kitchen sink and the logic isn't great. So these are some things that we've learned and started doing for ourselves as well. After you've gotten really familiar with a constraint and the logic that you get from that constraint in a 4x4, move to 6x6s. Again, a single constraint or eventually two constraints. Build up and pay attention to the logic and the logic that's forced in the grid by different ways that you can play with that constraint before you go to a full 9x9. And always keep in mind that idea of setting with intentionality, and take the logic from the smaller puzzles and scale it up. See how it changes when you go to the next size up. We're going to talk about some more general lessons as well, with some example puzzles of things we may have done not so well as compared to things that might have been done better.
Oh, this
works. You picked this.
I think we reordered the slides in ways I didn't intend. So we've already talked about this, the placing clues with intentionality. The puzzle on the left is one that Missing and I set, where we just sort of popped a bunch of thermos in because we thought they looked kind of cool. And then once, as enough puzzles, it narrowed it down to these. We're like, oh, if we put another thermo here, it could do that. And then we got down to these, and we're like, well, we need to give a 9 in order to make it resolve. And it solves, and it's not a totally unfun puzzle, but it's not an elegant puzzle. The one on the right was one that we published just a few days ago. Those are region sum lines, and in this one we were very deliberate about putting small value 4-cell cages in the corners to force values onto the region sum line around the fist-to-methyl ring, which forces a lot of other logic. And this one is a much more fun puzzle to solve because we were very intentional about the placement of clues. The one on the left is from, 18 months ago or so? Ish. So.
So one thing that people are tempted to do is to just really throw 1,000 different rule sets into the grid, and you're probably going to find a unique puzzle that way, but it's just a little bit too much. The puzzle on the left I set pretty early on in my setting career, probably 3 years ago at least, and everything is used once. Nothing leads to the next deduction. There's no cohesiveness here. And the rule set is 1.5 pages long. And that's not fun to slog through, and when you're only going to use each constraint once. Just don't do that. This is a puzzle I set just a couple weeks ago. And it uses 2 constraints, Ren bands and region sum lines, and everything about them informs each other. They play off of each other pretty well, in my opinion, and it just works better as a puzzle. You don't have to spend 20 minutes reading the rules. So really just focus on just choosing 1 to 3 constraints that just play well, really, nicely with each other. If you're, trying to use global constraints, be smart about when you're using them. Using them today in your 4x4s probably isn't even a good idea at all. For example, a Knight's Move 4x4 puzzle, it has 24 solutions, and all of those solutions are just, you have to figure out just the digits themselves instead of the pattern, because there's one pattern. King's Move is, yeah. So just avoid the global constraints for your 4x4s today, I think. And if you want to use them later, use them well. Use them for a reason. The puzzle on the left, you may have seen it for some reason featured on CTC last week or so. It's an awful puzzle. So there's one or 2 good deductions in this puzzle focused on columns 3 and 4. And then I got lazy and I said, I've got a deadline to meet with this puzzle. It's due in like 14 hours. Let's add a Knight's Move because that's vaguely related to the story of Rapunzel, right? And then I just, placed a 2 and finished the squiggly line, and it was like, that's a unique solution. I was like, okay, that's good enough. Don't do that. If you do have a deadline to meet for a puzzle, don't be like me and set it with less than 12 or 24 hours to spare. Try a little harder than I did with this. The puzzle on the right, I went into it from the beginning. It has a King's Move restriction. And these are combination region sum lines and parity lines. So I went into setting this puzzle with those 3 constraints in mind: region sum lines, parity lines, and King's Move. I designed a break-in around using that King's Move well, and that's you know, you can solve it yourself if you find it on my Logic Masters page. But it's centered around this line in the top left-ish area of the grid. And it really does use the global constraint productively, instead of just being a cheat code to finish the puzzle quickly. So just be mindful, if you do decide to use a global constraint, be mindful of how you're using it.
Once you have an idea and you've set a puzzle with it, you can iterate your ideas and see if you can make the puzzles even better. And these are two examples. You can tell that the first one was set in F puzzles and the second one was set in Sudoku Maker, because the lines are thicker in the first one, and we actually took the time to narrow the lines down in the second one just for cosmetic reasons. These are both good puzzles. They're playing on the idea that when you have modular lines, which is one of our favorite constraints, and cropped key dots, they play together really nicely, because 3 and 6 come from the same residue class mod 3, and so if you have a black dot on a line, it cannot be a 3-6, so you know it must be from 1, 2, 4, and 8. And that sort of deduction we can use as a teaching tool to do it once, and then once you've taught it, then you can use it in other puzzles. So Dutch whispers. If you have a black dot on a Dutch whisper line, it forces something interesting. I'll let you think about that. So we've got a number of puzzles that use that as a break-in deduction. So take your ideas and make new puzzles with them and see if you can do a better implementation of the idea.
So this next one sort of ties back into what I said earlier about making your puzzles too complicated early on. But a lot of people start setting because they're excited about this one really cool idea they have. And often it's a really complicated idea. And maybe it's a really good idea. Often it really is. But you don't really have the experience as a setter to implement it properly yet. So the puzzle on the left is my very first puzzle. It's a chaos construction, and I wrote Merry Christmas in the grid, or Merry Xmas. It was for the Secret Santa thing several years ago. And I mean, it's okay. I added in a couple given region borders here and a whole bunch of given digits. Part of that was because I was committed to writing these words in the grid, and that doesn't give a lot of flexibility, so keep that in mind as well. But a lot of it was I just didn't know what I was doing. So I had the rule set, and to this day I do think it's an interesting rule set, but I just didn't implement it properly the first time. So a few months later, I had sort of figured out what I was doing. I went back to that same exact rule set. I will note that in the second puzzle I added even squares for certain disambiguation purposes. This was also early in my setting career. But I came back to the idea, I think the second puzzle, the puzzle on the right, is much better from a logical standpoint. It's more interesting, and you know, if you've got this idea that you're really excited about, that's sort of what it deserves, right? Wait until you can do that idea justice.
So, now you have Snackdokus. And one of the most fun things in the world is to watch someone solve your puzzle on a stream. So please send your Snackdokus to snacksforscojo@gmail.com, and we've passed out flyers. Stein and Lumos, you got around the room with those? Okay, so you should have a hard copy flyer of this with the email to send them to, and then on Sunday, April 13th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, Scojo is going to stream solving those Snackdokus, and his channel is here, twitch.tv/Scojo Solves. And also do submit them to the SudokuCon puzzle pack if you want. I don't know how many submissions have come in for that. I know that we've said a couple that we haven't submitted that I don't know if there's a deadline on that, Clover, but no deadline. She's shaking her head. All right. So do submit those puzzles. It's really nice to have your puzzles seen, and it's really nice to watch someone else solve it. It's just incredibly thrilling. So with that, we have not much time for questions, and in fact, what we're going to do is we're going to probably give Ranks his computer so that he can go to the airport, but we'll be here for a few more minutes while we're packing up if you have more questions. But thank you all so much. We had so much fun in InCon this way. Thank you.
And I think we should once again thank Clover and Prof. Meow and Sven and everybody else, Glipperol, who was involved in Rockrat Zero, James Sinclair, Prof. Meow, I did say Prof. Meow, yeah, and Carabat, and for bringing up the idea in the very first place, for putting together what has been an absolutely stunning few days of spending time with great people.
Just want to, I don't think we've officially.
No, not officially.
Can I get a selfie?
Of course.
Awesome what you're doing with the Snackdokus. I always love seeing your name on puzzles and really appreciate that. And I hope to utilize them a lot when it comes to kind of tutorials, documentation, like here's an explanation what a thermo is.